pleasure just to introduce our final session of today. So we've got about 1 hour left together online, and we're going to be led through this 1 hour with Nathan Beard, who is an external consultant. He is based in London, and he's got lots of years of experience in both global logistics and security management in international NGOs. So he's worked in many countries, and he's now based back in the United Kingdom. And Nathan's passion, we were talking about our passions earlier, Nathan's passion is to really empower people to work effectively in remote and complex environments. And over the last few months, he's been working with the Leprosy Mission to develop and start to run some safety and security awareness courses for our staff around the world. So last month, he did the first course, which happened with the team in Mozambique. And in the next few months, he's going to do it with 6 other countries. So we're really pleased to be working with Nathan in this area. And Nathan's now going to take us through a case study where we're all going to get the opportunity to put ourselves in a scenario and try and work out what is the best thing to do. So Nathan, I'll just hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Let me just check that everybody can hear me okay. All good, all good. Yeah. Thanks, folks. Right, what I would love to do is pop up the presentation, just make sure that I can share that okay. Let's find it. How exciting. It's always fun when you look for your presentation that you know is there and it doesn't seem to be where you had left it. So bear with me 1 second, please, folks. There we are. Okay, are folk able to see the presentation all right?
Yep.
Splendid. I'm just popping you onto a different screen, which means I can see more of you. There we are. Good. So I just entered the room, Jane, as you were kindly introducing me. So I won't introduce myself further, and I will take the liberty of assuming that you know one another already. Thanks very much for having me. Incidentally, I do love working with organisations to empower people when it comes to making a sustainable and solid platform of safety and security to work from. Because having worked at the pointy end of both relief and development, I very much know the difference it makes when safety and security are operating effectively. In terms of the next hour, we're going to be connecting and looking at some materials in a variety of different ways. So we will use polls in just a moment. We will use breakout rooms. We'll certainly be using the chat function. I've understood that this particular conference is not being translated. So whatever it is that you're doing by way of accessing the language, keep doing that. And on that front, if I say anything that is completely mystifying, which does happen from time to time, please feel free to wave at me if you're able to be visible on screen, or alternatively to pop something into the chat function, and either I or perhaps Jane would be kind enough to pick that up if I don't spot it. Thank you. As ever, I'm sure you've already been told about this, but I've made this silent because it's such a distraction otherwise. So if we can avoid those distractions, so much the better. So what we're going to do, folks, is to take a journey together. I'm going to explain what's happening as we go, and the invitation to you is to grapple with some of the realities of dealing with circumstances as they emerge. In one sense, it's actually quite handy that we only have an hour in order to look at these materials, because in real life, things are not necessarily very convenient in terms of the time frame. Stuff happens quickly and requires us to make quite rapid responses. So we're going to be pressing into the area of what to do if an incident occurs. How can I, in my position as a member of the HR team, play my part for the best interests of my colleagues? So let's enter into that story now. And if anything is unclear, then please do ask. Oh, I almost forgot that there are some polls. So before we jump into the story, let's go with the poll. So if we could have the first poll, please. Thank you. I'd just like to get some perspective on your point of view. So which one of those options do you think are the most likely danger that your colleagues might encounter? These are all, I believe, anonymous, so don't worry. I won't see who's saying what, but it would just be interesting to know. Good stuff. I can't see a sort of indicator bar anywhere about how folk have been responding. There we are. So I'm hoping you can see the poll results as well. And I take my virtual hat off to you for coming up with what I would certainly agree is the top answer. So road traffic accidents, whilst they may in news terms, in international news media terms, seem like a mundane aspect of reality, are very much one of the most likely problems we would encounter. Now, those other things are possible, but in terms of statistical likelihood, I take a great deal of interest in road traffic incidents because they are happening so frequently around the world. Thank you. Could you pop up the next poll for me, please, Jane? So on that theme, perhaps you could just pop in there whether your own team has ever experienced a road traffic incident. So that's a vehicle crash or some sort of injury relating to a road environment. There we are, that's interesting. So it's a bit half and half, slightly more folk have experienced that in their teams. So first to say, I'm sorry that that's been your experience. It's also been my experience. In fact, on more than one occasion, I've been involved in vehicle incidents, and they can of course range from quite minor, losing a wing mirror, for example, to quite major. And so you'll soon find out that we'll be exploring the practicalities of dealing with that type of road circumstance. And you never quite know when these things are going to occur. As I discovered over the last 3 weeks, I drive a Land Rover for work. When I'm not delivering security training, the stuff behind me, some of you may be able to see, is because I work in forests, helping people to learn how to thrive in wild spaces. And twice in the last 3 weeks, my brakes have failed in my Land Rover, which could have been a much more upsetting experience than it turned out to be, but there we are. It does pay to be constantly alert. Okay, thank you, Jane. Could you pop up the next poll, please? So whether this was an incident that related to the road or any other kind of incident, I'm just wondering how many folk in the room have needed to report something which required international support. Okay, again, very helpful to have these sort of brief statistics to get my mind tuned in to the TLM sort of environment. So the majority of folk, 3/4, not consider that to be necessary, but about a quarter of you have sought international support. Okay, thank you. And the last poll, if you'd be so kind, Jane, thank you. So this is now about you personally. How do you personally feel about dealing with an incident among your staff team if urgent medical help is required? Would you consider yourself highly confident, somewhere in the middle, low confidence, or no confidence? Again, it's confidential, so you're quite at liberty to be honest. Okay. Well, it's pleasing to see that nobody has no confidence, which is a possibility, and most folk are sort of above the halfway mark, but there are a handful of us that are not necessarily feeling very, very strongly that if it occurred, we would necessarily know all the right things to do. So thank you, Jane, for putting those up and preparing those polls for us. That's a very helpful starting place. We will jump into our story and I will engage your help to find some resolutions as we go. Ooh. And I'll start by pressing the right button. Here we are. So you're in the office in the normal country that you work from, and a team of your colleagues are preparing to go on a remote site visit. They will be leaving tomorrow and they will be traveling by road. You don't know much about what they're planning to do, but you will be expected to help them if they encounter any problems. Lovely. Well, that's one of the things that springs up as a responsibility for folk in HR. So on that basis, I would like to pop you into two groups and ask you to examine these questions. I'd like you to write a list, please. In group one, I'd like you to think about what information do you need to have about the trip in advance in order to help your colleagues travel safely and potentially deal with issues if they arise. So group one, what information do you need as that HR anchor in the office who's not traveling? What do you need to know in order to be helpful to them? Group two, I'd like you to put yourselves in the minds of the actual travelers. So what preparations should your colleagues make before they embark on their journey? What things should they have sorted out in order to be confident that they will travel safe and well and be able to deal with issues if they arise? So it's a great pleasure to have help making breakout rooms and doing that sort of stuff. Usually I'm trying to fly solo with all sorts of screens and buttons. So it's nice to have some.
Thank you. Nathan, can you just repeat the previous slide? Just to clarify, yeah. Brilliant.
Yes.
Thank you.
So you're an HR person in the office, and what you hear from conversation in the office is people are preparing to go on a remote site visit tomorrow. They'll be traveling by road. So you know that you're going to be in the office. You're not part of this traveling party, but you don't really know what they're planning to do. But you do know that you'll be expected to help them if anything occurs. Between you and I, something's definitely going to occur. Yes, it's good to get our minds around that.
Okay, and can you repeat the questions as well?
Of course.
Thank you. Group
one, and I'll pop these up in the, oh no, I can't do that. I was going to say the broadcast function, but I think that's only for the host. Group one, what information do you need to have about the trip in order to help your colleagues travel safely or deal with issues if they arrive? Group two, what preparations do you think your colleagues should make before embarking on their journey? So what should the people who are going to be traveling do to be confident they are going to travel safely?
Okay, great. So I've put people into breakout rooms, and Damaris will be in room 1 and Cindy will be in room 2, and they can hopefully remind you of the questions as well. Okay, how long would you like in the groups, Nathan?
I think we'll spend 8 minutes doing that.
Okay.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think everyone's back.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, nice to see brief glimpses of some familiar faces. Good to see you folks. Thanks for coming back. It's always always a blessing when people don't choose the breakout room as their time to escape. So it will be tremendous if I could have somebody, some brave soul from Group 1 that wouldn't mind just briefly summarising your ideas about what information will be needed. Anybody up for that?
So in Group 1, we had the Africa region sharing a lot of thoughts, but maybe I can just point at the people that didn't have the opportunity to speak, that I know they were listening very attentively. I don't know whether Aminda, Linda, or one of the persons that didn't have the opportunity to speak that might want to gather some thoughts.
Yeah, I don't mind. So what we discussed was that there'd be lots of planning before the trip. So you would want to understand why you were going on the trip. Was it necessary? What the route you were going to take. Communication was said, which is communicate before you go, on the way, and when you get there, gathering contact numbers and telephone numbers, making sure you've got plenty of those in case anybody's phone doesn't work during the trip, making sure that the car is in good condition, and presumably checking out the route and the safety of that route as much as you can do before making the trip. I think that was sort of what I gleaned from all the chat.
Tremendous. Thank you very much, Aminda. That's a great place to start. And there's lots of practical suggestions there, which I very much like, being a pragmatic type. So I think you hit a lot of points on this list I'm now bringing up. So who's going? I'm not sure whether this necessarily came up. Who's giving them a security specific or a safety specific briefing? Are there any particular considerations about safety and security in the location they're traveling to or the routes that they will be taking? Who's going to be doing the driving? Not only where are they going to be working, but where they're going to be staying if it's lasting overnight. Where is the information going to be written down? Is this sort of on a whiteboard, written with pen at the back of an office somewhere? Is this on a piece of paper? Is it an electronic document? Just to know, where are we going to store these things in case we need to make quick reference to the details of this trip? Of course, the itinerary and timings, which you mentioned, the nature of their trip. So it's good to know who's in the car, where's it going, but what are they going to do when they get there? Because that will have some implications for the type of things they need to take with them, and the type of roles and responsibilities that are present amongst our colleagues in that vehicle. So yes, we need to know about the vehicles, details, and just as you said, communication, whether that is via text messages, or you're actually speaking to someone, or you have some special piece of equipment to do the communicating. Not just how will you do it, but with what frequency will you do it? So what are the allocated times when you are expecting to be in contact with people? So this stuff is really helpful for those times when we may suddenly discover we're going to be a travel buddy, and people will be looking to us to just check in on their journeys and make sure everything's going according to plan. Splendid, thank you very much, Group 1. So just popping back to Group 2, what preparations was it that you thought your colleagues should make before embarking on their journey? Would anybody like to feedback, please?
Yes, thank you. We have Geeta who took our notes for us and will help us to feedback.
Brilliant, thanks, Geeta.
Okay, so all right, I'll be feeding back from my group, but if I miss something, Cindy and others, you can just add it up. So when we had a discussion among the group, the first thing before we travel, all of them agreed that we should look at the route condition. How is the route, where we are going, the destination. So the destination should be well known by all of the groups who are on a visit. We must get the emergency contact numbers as well. In case if anything's happened, we should get the emergency contact numbers. We should make sure the vehicle conditions is good before traveling. It is well maintained and it has been a recent servicing. We should get a checklist and then make sure that all the checklist has been ticked off. Driver's well-being, the driver who will be driving the vehicle, we have to make sure that he is good enough to travel, how long the journey is, his health is in good condition. There should be a first aid kit available in the vehicle, and if There should be a fire extinguisher as well. If there is, it would be good. And then we must make sure that there is a spare tire as well. And then among the group of the people, if there will be a trained medical person, it would be good if something happens. So that if there will be a medical trained person, that would be good. Frequent communication, as Arminda has said, frequent communication to and for should be frequently. I think we also discussed that there should be a focal person among the group who will lead the group, so that it will be easier, so that he will be one contact person to communicate in the organization or to the HR. And I think that's it, what we have discussed. Thank you.
Wow. So here's some great news, friends. I will be very happy to be looked after by Group 1, and I will be very happy to travel with Group 2. That's a good comprehensive list of stuff that you've come up with. So I think you've pretty much hit all of those. Oh, here's one part of it. Am I physically prepared to travel? Do I have the things that I'm going to need with regard to the climate, altitude? Do I need vaccinations or medications with me? Documentation, and any equipment that will facilitate me as a traveller. And then these things which you particularly pressed into. Is the journey plan realistic? I'm a big fan of involving the driver and those that understand the location and the geography to advise us, well, what's feasible? What sort of distances can we expect to travel? And for that not to involve us rushing unnecessarily. You spoke about the driver and the vehicle being both roadworthy and properly equipped. Something that I'm a bit of a stickler for is whether the vehicle is safely loaded. So whether the items of cargo and equipment are properly stored within the vehicle so they can't move around in transit and cause any troubles. So great, but I'm pretty sure you hit almost all, if not all of those points as you fed back. So thank you for that. Right, we will move on very briefly. Here are the most recent statistics from the World Health Organization that came from their decade of looking at road travel and safety issues there. And this is simply to underline the fact that it's a very legitimate concern, not something that I'm worried about, but it's a legitimate concern for myself and my colleagues around the world, because 1.35 million people perishing on the roads each year, and it being principally a cause of death amongst anyone between the age of 5 and 29. That's a pretty serious thing to keep in mind. Okay, who's up for jumping in this vehicle and heading off somewhere? Anybody up for coming with me? Okay, no, this is not a vehicle that looks very healthy, so we're going to talk about what should we check to ensure a vehicle is roadworthy. So rather than breakout groups this time, if you could exercise your chat fingers, that's my sign language for chat fingers, then pop in the box for me your suggestions about what sorts of things you might like to check on a vehicle to persuade yourself whether or not it's a suitable vehicle to travel in, whether it's going to be safe. So anything that you like to look at, brilliant. Yeah, tyres and seat belts, bingo. They're very much at the top of my list. Seat belts. Any other suggestions? Terrific. Yeah, so look at the fluids, the water in the radiator. Is there brake fluid? Is there clutch fluids? Do the brakes work? Yeah, that's particularly on my mind at the moment. And if the brakes, what I learned in the last couple of weeks is if the brakes are a bit spongy, they're not going to get any better unless it's properly fixed by a garage. So yes. Yeah, if it's going to be a long journey, you might like to make sure that the seats are actually comfortable. I've had some very long, uncomfortable journeys. Thank you, Garland. There's no prize for running out of fuel, because that can result in an unplanned stop and that can expose us to other sorts of problems. Safety kits, water for the vehicle, water for us. And incidentally, if you find water that you'll be happy to drink, then that's probably safe enough to put in a radiator if that was required. Yeah, checking over the vehicle, that the basics work, lights, brake lights, headlights, the fluids, enough space for everyone going on the trip. Do you know what, Bunmi? That's a really key consideration. And I'm very sorry to say that one organisation I worked for, some colleagues of mine travelled and there were more colleagues than there were seats, and they had a terrible accident, and we actually lost a colleague because somebody was there were too many people in the vehicle, and so when it had a quite significant vehicle accident, one person sadly perished. So it's quite a serious business, making sure there are enough seats and that all of those seats have got seat belts so people can be secured. I salute you, Suma, for the suggestion of country map. I can't turn my monitor and camera around, but my office is full of maps because I'm very eager to know where things are. So there's some great suggestions, folks. Thank you for those. What I'm going to suggest to you as a quick way of remembering is something that I use with my own vehicles, and it's the acronym FLOWERS. There we are, lovely. And FLOWERS stands for fuel, lights, oil and hydraulic fluids. We've mentioned all of those things. Electrics. So is the battery in good condition, and anything that we might need to plug into the car, communications equipment, that sort of thing. Stuff made of rubber. So the tyres, but also the windscreen wipers and door seals. If they are in a shocking state, well, then it's very distracting not to be able to see through the windscreen while you're driving along. But also are for recovery. If we're going a long distance, maybe we need to have some recovery equipment, tow rope, shovel, jack, that sort of thing. And then S for seat belts and self. What's the condition of the seat belts and what's the condition of the driver? Because even if our driver is usually a competent and well-qualified person, there are things that can make a driver unfit for service. Are they exhausted with tiredness? Are they ill? I've had to stand down drivers who evidently had malaria, but they were still keen to do their job. I had to say to them, look, I appreciate your commitment, but you need to rest and recover, not drive a vehicle. So there are a number of things that can cause drivers not to be fit for duty, which we should be bearing in mind. Okay, I'm just going to keep my two screens in tandem. Right, we're going to move on to the next part of our story. So what you discover is your driver and 3 staff are going to travel to a remote village, and lucky them, they get to travel in a TLMI Toyota Land Cruiser, or a TLM, sorry, I should say, Toyota Land Cruiser. So they've got a nice vehicle, that's good. They're intending to take camera and video equipment with them in order to capture stories from a new partner organisation. Lovely. So we're going to meet some new allies, find out what wonderful things they're doing, and get some great stories for people to understand what TLM are doing in our country. You've agreed to act as their travel buddy and check on their journey. After an hour, that's the agreed time frame, you're expecting them to send you a text message with their progress, but no message arrives. Okay, what should you do? Pop in the chat box, exercise your chat fingers, and let me know what do you think we should do to be a good travel buddy. Thanks, Bunmi. So we can prompt them. So they were supposed to contact us, but yet, just as you're saying, Linda, perhaps they forgot. Send them a message, see if that stimulates them to respond. Call them and ask where they are. Yep. If we can't get through, be patient, call another personal number. Yes, if we've gone to the trouble of collecting not just one contact number, but the contact numbers for the phones of everyone in the vehicle during our planning stage, well, then we've got a little bit of flexibility. We can call a variety of people. So yes, good responses. We can be proactive. All means of communication available. Skype, phone, destination contact or travel companions. Thank you, Damaris. Yes, it's really important that we contact them or that they contact us. And so the more proactivity at this stage, the better. Splendid. Okay, folks, you're very much along the right lines. This is my suggested communication outage flow diagram. That's a bit of a mouthful, but this is what seems logical to me. So in the first instance, if they don't call us when we have expected them to call, we try to contact them on the agreed number. If we can't get through to them, we'll try other passengers and the driver's number, alternate devices, whatever means we have available, just as Damaris has mentioned. And we keep trying that for an agreed time frame. So this is quite important. Depending on the level of security, we might say, okay, if I've not heard anything from them or been able to contact them within half an hour of the agreed communication time, that's when we escalate to the next level. It might be as long as an hour. It depends on the local circumstances, but there needs to be a time frame so that the travel buddy understands, okay, things are probably fine. It's just that we're having some little difficulty in making contact, but we can't leave it indefinitely because they might actually be in trouble. So after half an hour, that's when we get more proactive still. We go to the expected arrival location. We call the partner and say, have you had any communication with this party of travelers coming from us to you? Maybe they have, in which case we can be informed. If that doesn't work, the next stage of escalation is we send people physically to go looking, assuming, of course, that there's not any indication that there is kind of major civil unrest that would cause us to be putting ourselves in an unacceptable level of risk. So assuming that things are fairly normal, we will send someone to look. The logical thing is, if they're nearer to the partner, perhaps someone from the partner can come find them. If they're nearer to us because they hadn't been going that long, we'll send someone from this end. If we can't find them from either end of the journey and we're getting really concerned, perhaps it's time to call the higher powers. If there are police or military or UN or another big agency that we're friendly with that might be able to assist us. So that's just the logical flow in my mind, but you guys were already very much onto that idea. Okay, moving onward. You eventually get through to one of your colleagues. They apologize that the agreed contact's phone ran out of battery life, but they're all fine. Phew. You expect them to call you, as agreed, after another hour. No one calls. What should we do now? We need to crack on with our communications outage plan as before. It's a little curious, perhaps, that this has happened twice in a row, but we've got a plan. Let's stick with the plan and see what happens. After waiting 30 minutes and trying to call everyone, you eventually get through to the driver. He sounds very upset. In the background, you hear some people are shouting angrily, and you hear him say two words. You hear the word crash and the word motorbike, and then the phone goes dead. It stops working. Sorry, it's not a very happy thing to think about, but that's the situation that we find ourselves in as a travel buddy. So we're miles away back in the office, and there's all this commotion going on down the end of the phone. So what I'd like us to do, folks, is to pop back into those same breakout rooms that we were in before. And group one, I would like you to think about what information do you need about the incident in order to organize effective help for your colleagues. Group two, I would like you to think about, well, what resources might your colleagues need? So group one, information, group two, resources. I'd like you to have a crack at just quickly listing those. I'm not going to give you a great deal of time, just 5 minutes, I think, and then we will jump in.
I think everyone's back.
Good stuff. Welcome back, folks. Sorry that the time in your group was probably quite brief, but we are rapidly responding to this emerging incident. Could somebody please from group one, perhaps somebody that didn't feedback before, just give me a very brief summary of your top suggestions about the information you want in order to grapple with responding to the incident?
Bumi, I see your image is on. Would you like to feedback from our group?
Sorry, my network is terrible. I keep dropping off, so I'm not really following.
Okay, no problem.
My internet has been dropping off and on, so
no problem.
Find someone else.
Can I pick maybe on either Linda or Mama Doris? Would one of you like to feedback?
I'll feedback, although my internet's dropping as well. But we discussed the importance of gaining as much information as we could of finding out exactly what's happened, and depending on the severity of the accident, it could be that it's not actually them that's been in an accident, that there are two cars behind the accident, or if it is them in the accident, you need to find out, is anybody injured? How do you help the people that are injured? Is the car roadworthy? Can it go on? And we had a bit of a discussion about when you contact the emergency contacts, and my personal opinion is when not until you have information to actually give them. There's no point of scaring them unnecessarily.
Okay, good stuff. Thank you, Linda, for your feedback about that. Some good practical considerations and some good human considerations. Also, I would certainly agree that it's very hard to really help people understand an incident until the facts have been made clear. So as a quick way of either delivering an incident report or asking the right sort of questions for an incident report, I commend to you these 6 things beginning with W. So here we are. Who is involved? Where has it happened? When did it happen? Okay, so we've got people, location, time frame, and then 3 whats. What has happened? What has been done already? And what is still needed? So these are the absolute bare bones of the facts of an incident report in order to quickly ascertain what it is that needs to be provided and sort of where we need to go from here. So if you are either on the ground and it's you that's involved in an incident and you need to report it to someone else, remembering the 6W incident reporting idea is something that helps to keep the right things in mind. Okay. Group 2, you were thinking about resources. Could you just give me a quick summary of what resources you thought might be necessary for your colleagues?
Yeah, we had a good discussion, and as Linda said, knowing the extent and finding out what has happened is key. But we were going on the assumption that there were angry people, there might have been an accident, there might be some injuries. Top of the list was the police, potentially, because and on that side, wherever they happen to be, whether it's closer to our end or closer to the community or partners, and that they might be police might need to get involved, especially if there are angry people around there. And then if there are anybody that's injured, they might need an ambulance, help from the hospital as well. We definitely would have needed information about the partners so that we could contact them to help bring people to them, especially a vehicle. We were talking about an extra vehicle who can pick people who might not be injured or up back to safety. In the extent of the angry people, you might need some peacekeeping security if needed as well. Yeah. So those things, those are resources that we thought.
Thank you, Cindy. That's another great list. It's almost like you guys have done this sort of thing before. So thank you for bringing your broad experience to this event. Right, let's move on and just think about those. So see if there's anything that you didn't already mention. Perhaps we'll just dwell on this for a second. Someone to manage the situation on the scene. So trying to find out who's there that's in a suitable condition, physically and emotionally, in order to help manage and direct things. It may be that if you have more information and people have become injured, that someone needs to be allocated to inform the relevant next of kin, the emergency contacts of anybody who's become injured. and yes, someone to recover perhaps the damaged vehicle and collect agency assets. But of course, that's much lower down the list than the immediate attention required by staff. A few quick tips in terms of first aid and medical help. Obviously, the time that you need first aid training is before you have a first aid incident. I remember being in a casualty simulation aged 18, so I was a casualty on an expedition environment simulation, and I spent a long time writhing around in a ditch waiting for people to come and find me because they weren't very observant, and eventually they came back. And when someone pops open a first aid kit and the first thing they reach for in that first aid kit, seeing that you're injured on the ground, the first thing they reach for is the little booklet that says things to do if someone is injured. That's not actually very encouraging. So learning the first aid before the incident is very helpful. If we're not a first aider, fair enough, but it's a really good idea to find out who amongst our team is capable, competent in that regard. Because the moment you have an unconscious casualty or someone that has a nasty broken limb, or perhaps there's a lot of blood that's spilling out, that's when you need training, not just a first aid kit. Okay. You mentioned already in terms of the clinic or hospital, understanding what's available. In my personal experience of travel, it's been a very rare commodity for ambulances to be available outside of a very small selection of countries. And we may need to make money available to pay for services. They may not necessarily be availed unless payment is there. Communication equipment, again, when you're in these urgent sort of circumstances, having reliable communication equipment makes things much less stressful. And then in terms of medical insurance, I'm not sure we mentioned that already, understanding what they will do and what they won't do. Certainly amongst the international traveling folk that I'm often training, I'm not from TLM, but other places, people imagine that having medical insurance means you'll have a red button you can press, and when you press it, a helicopter will appear or somebody will zoom in and rescue you, the cavalry will arrive. Whereas in reality, it's much more likely to be you picking up a telephone and chatting with some people in a call center that may be able to advise you about how to get to a clinic. But it should definitely be clear to those who may need to rely on any medical insurance you've got, what that medical insurance will actually provide. Okay, here's the next part of the story, folks. The driver finds a working phone and calls to say one staff member has a broken leg. Another staff member is unconscious after they banged their head quite badly on the windscreen. The driver and one staff member are physically okay, but they're very shaken. Local villagers have become angry that one of their community has been knocked off their motorbike, although the motorbike rider is not actually seriously injured. However, the community are threatening to beat the driver, and some of them are trying to remove equipment from the damaged vehicle. So the video camera, the recording equipment looks like it's in jeopardy. Which brings us to the next question. Now, rather than moving into a breakout room, because that does take up a little bit of administrative time, what I would like to propose is this. Group one, so folk that remember being in group one a few minutes ago, if you could respond in the chat box and tell me what would you consider to be your priorities in managing this situation? What things should get your first and most urgent attention, and what things are important but perhaps get attention further down the line? So pop that using your chat fingers into the box if you would be so kind from group one, and then we'll move on to group two. Thank you. Yes, group two priorities. Group one priorities, group two, what advice would you give the driver? So if you just put a 1 or a 2 at the beginning of your chat message, then that will help me understand which question you're answering.
Can you maybe go back a slide as well, Nathan, please?
Sure thing.
Thank you, that's great.
So you've got a staff member with a broken leg, an unconscious staff member, the driver and one other staff member are okay but very shaken up. The driver is in some danger because the local folk are threatening to beat them up. They hold the driver responsible, and people are trying to remove your property from the car. Medical help. I'm definitely in agreement with Linda. If I was bashed up in a vehicle incident, I would certainly want medical help. Calling the police. Yes, get assistance from people who should hopefully be able to keep the peace. Yes, so Arminda suggesting that we ask some important questions whilst we've got the driver on the phone. What's already been done? Are the police on the way? Is medical help on the way? Because if we know that that's been done, then we can focus on other tasks. Yeah, so the in the vehicle, out the vehicle thing depends a little bit on the specifics of the context, whether the unconscious individual is in the vehicle, which they may well be. That will change our response. But if you don't need to have people in the vehicle and it can be locked, that might be a sensible option. Ask the driver to give the phone to the leader of the angry mob and speak with them, convince them that this travel is for medical work. Okay, so I had a little think about that, and that may be a good option. Give the angry people a separate focus away from the driver. You might lose the phone, but if they're willing to talk, then at least that is something that takes the attention away from the driver. Police and medical, yep. Thank you, Jane, for mentioning prayer. So in all seriousness, and folks, I join you as a brother in faith. There is no gnarly circumstance that I have experienced whilst working and living overseas that hasn't prompted me to pray. And the worse the experience, the more fervent my prayer, including the experiences that were most likely to result in my untimely demise, which has happened a small handful of times. So it is possible to pray in a quite intense way at the same time as managing or experiencing a situation, and it makes a big difference. So yes, and yes again to praying for wisdom and assistance. In fact, my first action when my brakes failed on a fast road in the UK 2 weeks ago, as I managed to bring the vehicle to a halt, was Jesus help me. That was as far as I got. And you know, the next thing to happen, I turned around and I couldn't see any traffic where there had been lots before. And the first car I saw was a police car. And the guy jumped out and said, "Do you want a tow?" So I was very glad to have that prayer rapidly answered. Nearest police station, connect driver on a conference call. Okay, a little bit dependent on what sort of coverage you've got. Okay, protect the driver from the villagers. Yes. So there are a number of, again, very practical suggestions. Thank you for those. I would certainly agree. Let's have a quick look at my little quick lists. So first aid assistance up there at the top of our priorities, protecting the driver from mob justice. And you made a variety of suggestions about how we might achieve that. Most likely, I think it will be involving someone else to advocate on behalf of the driver, probably the police. Possibly you could speak directly to the crowd with a mobile phone, but that's a little bit of a thorny one, depending on how many communication devices you've got. Once the phone goes to the crowd, you may never see it again, and you need to stay in contact with your staff. Recovering the staff who are injured into proper medical care after they've had first aid, and uninjured staff to a safe place. If it's possible to protect the agency assets, great, well, let's do that. But it's not our first concern when people have been injured. And yes, thinking about, okay, we're going to need to debrief the staff as soon as they are in a fit location and in a fit state to have us ask them some questions. And we're going to need to work out, okay, how are we going to inform their families once we've got some solid information to share, so we don't just freak people out and be unable to substantiate exactly what's going on. Advising the driver, some sort of protection, as you'd already mentioned, and getting to a safe place. Maybe the partner, if they're nearer to the partner, they can get to them sooner, could be able to help. If you're going to appeal to folk in the local community, it may help to ask to speak with a village elder, someone in a position of authority and leadership who may be able to actually work to our benefit. And if at all possible, advise the driver to avoid fighting and arguing, even if they feel that they're very much not in the wrong. Just catching up on this from Luis. Yeah, thanks, Luis. I've certainly worked in locations like that. So it may be that in the best case scenario, you can go there in the vehicle, but if not, you literally need to run for your life or get any transport that you can in order to go to a police station and turn yourself in and say, I've been involved in an accident. There's, you know, some angry people that wants to take justice in their own way, and yeah, to do things that way, to seek the immediate assistance of the police. Ensure villages that will take care of the injuries. So yes, one thing I didn't mention here, but I'm glad that you've drawn it out, is if it's possible to offer some medical assistance to the injured community member, that may help. In this case, in this particular scenario, I mentioned that the rider of the motorbike is not seriously injured. However, if there's someone available to, you know, check that they're okay, assuming that they're happy to be approached, and offer them some assistance, that may very well help to calm a little bit the situation of those who are angry at the incident. I wish there was a simple golden rule. Always do these things and you'll be fine, but it's just not like that out there in reality. It has a lot to do with our decision-making process at the time. So we'll move on. Yeah, thanks. Helpful point there from Belle about making sure drivers speak the same language as those they're likely to find. So some good news. Mercifully, the new partner who was at the other end of this journey has a pickup, and they're not too far away. So they reach the scene within half an hour and evacuate our injured staff to hospital and the uninjured staff to the safety of their compound. When the partner arrived, the local police had already got there and they had protected the driver from serious harm. The camera and film equipment, however, is missing from the Land Cruiser, and 2 family members of the injured staff who you had informed are ringing you repeatedly. They're absolutely desperate to have some information about what's happened to their family member. So the last questions, do you know what? I was going to do this on a Jamboard, but I think perhaps it will be less fiddly, given the time, if we do this in the chat box. So if you would be happy to, and everybody can answer either of these questions, but let's start with this one. What sorts of things should we say to family or emergency contacts? So you've got people constantly calling you. What things will be wise to share with the family? Or what could you do to reduce their stress?
Maybe not fully share the detailed information, but just to highlight them something has happened in light. Maybe things may get better, just to highlight them, but not on the detail.
Okay, yes. So I think it's important for them to know the basic facts so that they understand, is there something they need to do? Or are you covering the support of their family member, and to make sure that they do have the important facts, because people may fill any void in information with their imagination and believe that things are worse than they actually are if they haven't got that information from us. So I'm just catching up with the messages in the box. Yeah, thank you, Bunmi, about making sure they understand. Not fatal. Bunmi, go ahead.
I would say if it's possible, yes. I would say if it is possible, while talking to the family, if the injured individual can speak as well, because it always comes the heart of the family member if they can hear the voice of the person that okay, is alive, and they can just assure the family, I'm okay, it's just a little injury or whatever. At least to give them calmness that okay, it's all right, because like you said, all manner of thoughts goes through people's mind because they are living a gap for uncertainty, and that can be worrisome for the family. Yeah.
Yes, people can get very stressed, quite understandably, when they hear that a family member has been injured. And so if it's feasible, Obviously not so good for the unconscious casualty, but if it's feasible for their family member to speak in person at an appropriate moment, that's helpful. I was just looking at what Jane had suggested. Tell them what's happened and how it's being dealt with, and then agree a time that you will contact them again. Because if they're wondering, oh, what's happened now, then they may be more likely to constantly be ringing in to try and get more information, whereas being empathic, I think that's the right word, or having empathy for them and saying, look, I know this is possibly a bit shocking, and I'm sorry it's difficult. We're doing everything that we can, and we will call you in an hour's time. So whatever that happens to be, at midday we'll call you and ensure that you have the information, so that they know that there's a definite point. It may also be helpful to choose someone from within the staff team who has any kind of training in dealing with people that are in difficult circumstances, or dealing with family members in crisis circumstances, if you have those sorts of folk available. Just catching up on the chat feed. Yeah, what you're doing about it. Yeah, thanks, Patience, about helping them to stay calm. If we're able to stay calm, that often helps other people to stay calm. Yep. Thank you. Sorry, I can't read as fast as I can talk. Yeah, so giving them assurance that their family member is being looked after and telling them the key points of that. And noting the fact that you have resources for this kind of thing and you are being very proactive. So they don't need to spring into action. That's one of the things that happens for family members. They're like, seriously, one of my family members is injured, I'm going there, and they want to get involved, quite understandably. However, if you give them an understanding, it's okay, we're on it, we're dealing with it, then they can perhaps relax a little bit. In terms of debriefing people, yeah, that's a really important point. Thank you, Damaris. Don't promise what you can't fulfill, because that's likely to make things very messy, and it will damage the trust of all parties, unfortunately, both the injured people and their family members. So I know it can be a temptation to promise things, but only stick to what you know you can make happen. Yet sometimes, if it was a really bad incident, it may be better not to give them the update by phone, but to go around and give that update in person. I appreciate that's a much bigger resource requirement, but it's a consideration, certainly if a fatality has occurred, not to do that by the phone, but to send someone from TLM around to the house in order to speak with them in person. Now, in terms of debriefing people following an incident, we talked about the 6 W's before, and I'm coming to my conclusion just for your for your info, Jane. We talked about the 6 W's before. As we debrief people, it's not just information that we want to extract from them. There's another thing going on. Sure, it's helpful to have the particular details of the incident, and when you're no longer in the incident, you're a little bit more in a safe space to give further information. However, we're particularly interested in the needs of that individual, whether they've been physically injured or not physically injured. They may have been psychologically, emotionally injured, and so it's important to help them pastorally, help them psychologically. So if you have skills within the team in order to bring psychological first aid, well, that's tremendous, but I appreciate not all teams do. And so having access to people who are able to bring psychological support, emotional support, possibly spiritual support also, given the faith basis on which we're working, they are allied considerations. So it's not just about making sure you get all the information that the organization needs to learn from, but that they also understand that you are hearing them and that you are able to facilitate their journey back to full strength, back to being restored. Rather than speak further about that just now, what I'd like to do is point you towards a document. Here it is. So the Global Interagency Security Forum, GISF, formerly EISF, has created this very helpful document, Crisis Management of Critical Incidents. Now, what we've been talking about wasn't technically a crisis, it was an incident. There are things in this document about incident management rather than crisis level incidents, which require an international response. But there are some really helpful pointers in this document. Evidently, it's quite a generic document for those that are managing crises or crisis management teams, but it's got some very helpful pointers about how to organize and structure things. One aspect of dealing with an incident, whether it's us as an HR person or another person in the office, is to understand what's the expected hierarchy. Who should be taking responsibility for what? Should I be doing these things? Should it be the country lead? If they're available, of course, because country leads may be out of the country or doing something else. So yes, it helps us to organize our thoughts, not just about what to do, but who's taking responsibility for what, so we act in a coordinated way. Tremendous. I think it's quite fair to say, Jane, that I could say more, and there are certainly other questions that I could ask. I appreciate that we're just a little bit after your anticipated finishing time, and so I will stop there.